Our third segment is an interview between Argon&Co's partner and procurement specialist Dennis Houdijk, who will interview Professor Dr. Raffaele MUSCETTA. Raffaele is a senior advisor in the Argon&Co community with more than 30 years of experience. He has been in leading positions for companies like Bombardier, ABB, and Suez. And currently he's the academic director of the MBA in supply chain at the Vinci Executive Education and has taught different business schools in France for over 20 years. I would really like to welcome Dennis and Raffaele for this next segment. Dennis, over to you.
Well, thank you, Roberto, for that introduction. And I'd like to go back to the start of the webinar where Art Willem has shared that, we see the declining markets. And what does it mean and where does it come from? I'll give you a little bit of feedback before we go over to you, Raffaele. What we've seen is since the beginning of 2023, we've seen the markets have turned, which means that there wasn't companies were faced with inflation, so an increase in costs, specifically on materials. And as time passed by, we also saw that inflation coming up into the labor costs. And that put the margins under pressure because in the beginning, companies were able to pass through these increases to their customers. But as time passed by, that became much more difficult. So we actually saw as well the inflation coming down, but it did put pressure on the margins of companies. So we see that in the market, there is an increased focus on productivity and cost. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, Raffaele, you have an impressive track record in procurement. So if you hear us talking about these trends and developments in the market, what's your view on it?
Well, first of all, thank you guys for the great introduction. A great seminar, by the way, a webinar that is rich and is inspiring. We put together a few pages, and what I'm seeing, and today I'm actively supporting companies in that journey. I mean, essentially competitiveness, improvement in EBIT or EBITDA, essentially productivity. I mean, there are different terms. We wanted to share, and probably it's a humble way to kick it off, probably with the first page. I don't know if Roberto and yourself, Dennis, can potentially put it on the screen. But Art said it at the beginning. There are many ways. There are plus 60 levers that companies can activate to either increase productivity, either increase on profitability, or either reduce on cost. So all that plays, let's say, in a straight end, which is essentially, getting better economics for the company you are in. We wanted in these 30 minutes of plus is to go over a few levers and probably exchanging with you, Dennis, how I live that essentially, and that what you can see on this page is again is an extraction. It's not exhaustive. We're not pretending to deploy the full toolbox of spend management, or again different terms. But what we're going to probably, if you can see at this hexagon, you will see on the upper part is tactics or strategies that are, let's say, between mid to or short to mid term. So kind of tactical, very operational. And then on the lower part, you look at things like supply chain financing or ESG. I mean, which is the same of the essence now in all the agendas, but also category management. So you will see a kind of mid to long term kind of levers and strategies on the lower part, and then on the upper part. Well, what I wanted to potentially, if you allow me, Dennis, is to share with the audience a blend of it, kind of potentially two short terms and one like mid to long term, and then of course kick it off for questions and answers.
Yeah, well, happy to hear that, Raffaele. And it's interesting because before we've talked about, and Leo mentioned that as well, about costs and how costs are built up. Here we are focusing on the procurement element, where you see that companies typically, 60-70% of revenues typically go through the supply chain, through procurement. So there's, it's an ideal set of levers you can pull to manage your cost as a company. So if you look at these options, let's go through them one by one. As you said, I think looking at this rainbow, typically control tower, negotiation factory, category management, these are the ones, if you talk about managing spend, which can be very effective. So I'd like to go to the next slide, where we're going to deep dive into cost control. How would you describe this, and how effective is this one?
Well, it's a great example of, sometimes perceived as extreme. Again, let's potentially define them as cost control tower, as the name stands, kind of overview of how you spend your money and how you control it. But it's simple to say. So let's dive on the how. So anyway, sometimes it's used in extreme cases of cost control. Potentially, these control towers are indeed a great tactic when managing spend, even in normal times. By the way, it cannot be seen also only as extreme strategy or tactic. It can also be because it has these attributes. I'm going to cite a few of them. It's not exhaustive list. But something that I like about cost control towers is one that allows the organization to discriminate from key versus discretionary expenses. Anyway, that it's a kind of self-reflection of where the money should be put in. Second is essentially that bring cost awareness into the organization, but also ownership. So kind of preamble of zero-based budget. Some of the companies and some of our audience, chief CPOs or chief supply chain officers, probably are applying it already. So ZBB was a fantastic tool, and when applied wisely, it can again reach and raise this awareness on cost management. But I think what I like the most about cost control towers is essentially the cross-functional intent of it. So it's not just the procurement or supply chain organization that drives it, but it's essentially let's say a blend or a cluster of multifunctional team. Let me just potentially share with you guys one of my experience on the rail industry, and it was a kind of tough time for specifically the lifetime of that company in that period of time. Anyway, cost control should and had to be applied. And then we're looking at all families of spend. One of them is temporary workers. Blue collars, and essentially people that are on the shop floor that then you subcontract to do a specific task like welding or assembly shops or different tasks in the assembly shops. So how did it work? And for this environment, well, it was in essence budget owners needs to justify the expense. So in other words, there is this forum created by a multifunctional team. In this case, it was HR, finance, the CEO, and then, of course, the chief supply chain officer. And then it was a kind of hosting, let's say, different reviews on demands from operations in order to say, okay, how can I justify me, budget owner, that demand? So just that exercise of, let's say, proving and also demonstrating the need of that expense, raises all sort of awareness, if you want. So where the money is going to spend, what is the deliverable of that work package or that work that is going to be engaged with subcontractor, et cetera, et cetera. So again, as you can see, it's kind of virtuous. It can be seen again, I repeat myself, extreme, because it's like a housekeeping activity. You are controlling your costs, and potentially, you're not accustomed, certain organizations are not accustomed to justify budget, but it's essentially carry on budget from year to year. Here, essentially, is coming to this team, which is essentially the same company in the same boat, and then in the spirit of controlling things and justifying its existence or its presence in terms of threat. So as you can see, it's a virtuous tactic. It can be also, of course, can also perceive as a locking or let's say a bottleneck kind of activity. And yes, certain cases, companies need to discriminate what is essentially everything that is, let's say, not necessary or discretionary expenses versus strategic ones. And this is a powerful tool that can serve that purpose.
Yeah. So you mentioned it's effective. It's important to apply it in a cross-functional setting. And before we go into the next option, it raises a question in my mind. So what level of saving would you typically see applying these cost control tower strategies?
It's a great question, and it comes all ways. I mean, how can I detect that saving into the P&L? That's a classic. I mean, how can I transfer that? Because essentially we're talking here about demand management, right? So, I mean, the best savings that you do is a spend that you, let's say, avoid, and but you need to be you need to be strategic about which spend is going to be reduced and whether it can be reduced, and that is the, I would call it, the strategic intent of this tactic. So percentages can go from, well, if you look at your P&L and you look at SG&A and you look at everything that is non-labor, by the way, I mean, all the things that we're talking here is OPEX and CAPEX, but OPEX labor, it's out of the equation. It's different restructuring, let's say, levers. Here we're talking about between 8 to 10%. But if you accompany that, and I hope we can probably share the next step, if you accompany with different techniques, yeah, you can reach 2 digits because essentially it's a very, let's say, intense in terms of energy, but also in short-term results. So anyway, between 8 and 10%, I would say is safe to say.
Okay, well, that's a significant part to the bottom line. So if we look at a bit less disrupting strategy, if we go through that rainbow of options, the negotiation factory. So can you tell us a little bit about what's different in a negotiation factory compared to what companies typically do? Because negotiation is part of your procurement activities anyway, isn't it?
Beautiful and well said. As a matter of fact, I mean, the first one we were talking about import, and I like our colleagues talking about our colleague from Cartier talking about inwards and outside. And of course, Art also mentioned it. But again, the first one, it is regarding to how the company manages its spend and then prioritize where the money goes. So that's this one. Second one goes into the supply chain, and then a Lego factory turn in years a little bit the kind of sequence, so it's massified in a kind of out-planned or non-planned event. There's, I mean, you have contracts and framework agreements that are, let's say, lasting number of years. And probably you're going to say, hey, Rafael, what do I do with those contracts? So anyway, a Lego factory calls for a series of activities that are engaging negotiations with pretty much the most of the supply chain. I mean, essentially, if you apply the 80-20 kind of rule, you will figure out that those number of suppliers are going to pop up immediately. And then it's a planified structure, but also well prepared. And I need to put these in parentheses in bold and capital letter. I mean, this cannot be improvised. This cannot just be, out of the blue, and then we just launch an eco factory. No, it has to be planified. And again, it's another technique that can be applied for grasping pricing out of the supply market in tough times. Usually, I mean, it's applied when companies are restructuring, don't get me wrong, because you are looking at cost out, cost containment strategy, transformational projects. It could be either, reorganizations or resettings, and then you want at T0, to restart again the whole motion. But it can also be for aspects that you can grasp in the negotiation. Watch out. It can also be for new product introduction, time to market, time strategy. You're accelerating innovation with your suppliers, and then potentially your nego factories are going to be a blend of these two. Second is essentially everything that is redesigned to cost, designed to cost, and then you can push those projects and resource those projects from supplier perspective and your company's side. Your teams. Working capital. We've been talking about cash, cost containment, but let's not forget that cash is king. Cash is essentially the rule of the game. And as a matter of fact, talking about the devil is today's in most of the agendas. How can we protect cash? So nego factories can help on that. And then last can be also capacity allocation. When you're in a growing market and you want to secure your position versus your peers, certainly a nego factory can serve in order to accelerate those processes and then do it massively, because probably the company is growing, exponentially everywhere, not just in the specific pockets of the company. Nego factory can be seen as an eye opener, Dennis. As a matter of fact, a shake-up. Look at, you're shaking up your organization, waking it up. Potentially, it's even worth doing it when things are okay. Why? Because it mobilizes, let's say, teams. It gets energized. But watch out. As I said at the beginning, it needs to be well prepared. When you put these kind of accelerators, you can detect that the supply demand or your market, the market where you are, is not specifically a buyer's market. It's not even satisfying in terms of supply demand. So, as I said at the beginning, you can probably fire back, and then you need to be, let's say, careful about it, because it can uncover, and it's something that I realize in experiences applied, is one, your resources. Are they, strong enough? Are they trained enough? Second is your understanding of your market, supply market, but also your positioning against or with that supply market. Of course, if that is not carefully prepared, certainly nego factories can fire back. So watch out. It can be a double sword kind of effect. So again, preparation is success. So understanding your market dynamics, kind of porter things, is of the essence. And then we'll talk after, but essentially understanding your positioning in that supply base. Again, as I said, is a great tactic. It can serve two purposes: accelerating, getting cost out, but also animating, energizing, and getting your teams a little bit shaken up, if I can use positively that term.
Yeah. So if I hear well, there's a couple of things I take away from this. So it means we need to be cautious, because it can be, there's risks associated as well if you don't do it properly. And it can be effective. But one of the things that comes to my mind is, how sustainable is the negotiation factory? And that takes me actually to the next options in our rainbow of options, which is category management. So, and just checking with you, I would guess negotiation factory is a very strong accelerator, like you said. But if you want to move more to sustainable and strategic approach, you probably choose for category management, right?
You nailed it. And we said at the beginning with the control tower is demand management, so buying less. Second, it will be more pricing oriented. You're driving your nego factories through pricing negotiations. I said it's a blend of other attributes, but essentially pricing. So buying cheaper. And then category management, I wouldn't say buy differently, because specifications probably will stay the same, but it's not redesigned to cost or designed to cost activity. But I think it goes into a more strategic, sustained approach. It's a must-have. I mean, I don't perceive an organization with a cross-functional team that sets up the foundation for acquiring and sourcing or procuring essentially goods and services with an aim on the total cost of ownership and then innovation, ESG, which is on the top of the agenda. As a matter of fact, the category management looks at all cost components, but again, innovation certainly is in the agenda. I mean, this is where you put a cross-functional team with engineering, quality, of course, finance sometimes, and then the supply chain or procurement as a facilitator, but then looks at innovation, new requirements, the risk management of the whole, and then, of course, ESG. You mentioned it right at the beginning. It was in that hexagon, and this is becoming in the top of the agenda in most of the chief supply chain officers and CPOs as part of their day-to-day delivery on ESG KPIs. So that makes the job complex. So you need to look at talent management. I mean, you need to have the right people in order to steer those teams and facilitate and energize those teams. Second is essentially a cross-functional team. So you need onboarding. You need your colleagues in different functions to adhere to that mindset. And then, of course, it requires a robust process, which includes not just a documented way of expressing your needs. I mean, a workbook, a category workbook, as we call it, but also sourcing boards and instances that C-level management is engaging the way you are proposing to go, which is the strategy that you are, let's say, nailing it there. By the way, in the previous times, I wouldn't go that far, like 30 years, as Roberto was saying. But yes, at the beginning, we're looking more at the supplier allocation, how much I'm going to give to supplier 1, supplier 2, supplier 3, prices, probably a new product introduction, and probably category workbook. So we're, I would say, gravitating around this concept. What I'm finding exciting times now is essentially, looking at partnerships that will help in decarbonizing your balance sheet. So, I mean, I'm just confronted to a situation in the new generation of nuclear reactor, these SMRs, and we are developing the whole value chain in that sector. And then companies are not looking at these solution providers as providers of energy coming from these nuclear containerized kind of solutions. They're looking also at investing in this company because, again, their balance sheet get, let's say, decarbonized. And that is category management. You see, so I mean, creating that relationship and looking at beyond just the cost, even though it's a TCO, it's just rejoicing. I mean, it's essentially a new times that we're living today. So in the early times, we're looking at gravitating at basic concepts. Don't get me wrong. It's always, there are companies with different level of maturities. But today is about how can I partner in order to get an agenda of decarbonization that is, I hope it is the purpose and the intent of everyone that is watching this webinar on a personal basis. I mean, the planet Earth is on stake. I think we have concur on that. So let's work around that. So anyway, you see category management, it's not about, cutting prices, not about, managing spend, but it's essentially something that is performing something better and at a higher intent as we speak. So anyway, fantastic times, Dennis, as a procurement and supply chain manager.
Well, thank you, Raffaele, and I agree with you. It's been very helpful to hear you elaborate on the options, and I'm sure there's a lot more to tell. But especially if you talk about cost management, we've seen some very effective ones. The control tower, it's short term, it's disruptive. Negotiation factory, a little bit less disruptive, but certainly a very strong lever companies can pull to manage their costs. And finally, category management with your explanation about ESG and decarbonizing your balance sheet. So I think that's a nice a range of options that can be applied by various number of companies. And I would like to take the opportunity to share, we do have as Argon&Co expertise in across a wide range of industries, and also with a lot of different categories. We've got in-depth expertise to support our clients on this. And each of the options you mentioned is something we have in our portfolio, but much more. So, I think if you talk about cost management in declining markets, procurement and pulling the levers, cautious, as you said, because you don't want to be too disruptive, is a very interesting option. Okay, let's see if there's any questions, Roberto.
Yes, I think we're going to start to give the audience just a couple of seconds to enter the questions in the chat. And it was very inspiring, Dennis and Raffaele. So now we're going to see what type of questions we get. And this is a very nice question. I think, Raffaele, it's a nice question. What are the barriers to the successful implementation of a control tower?
Beautiful. And, I don't want to simplify the answer, but it's all about change management. I mean, essentially how to put that together. I've been talking about cross-functional team, onboarding people into that process. So it has to be well done, if I can use the verb, but essentially is that onboarding of multi-parties. It requires essentially an intellectual effort, an advertising, an onboarding, a communication strategy that is robust, that is well thought, that is well prepared. Nothing out of the three, none of them is improvised. So anyway, onboarding people, communicating, sometimes, understanding the why and trying to explain it if necessary, it is also required. But again, what are the barriers? Essentially, the classic barriers of change management. Comfort zones. Hey, Raffaele, we've been doing that, and I've been working in this way all my life. So why should I negotiate now? Because I got my contract that is expiring in 3 years. I don't need anything. I mean, there is an escalation formula. The prices goes up. So that's the deal with this price. So there are things that are arguable. There are things that are not that arguable. So empathy needs to be, relevant. So basic barriers are the classic barriers of any program that is implemented. So a great excuse to get a change management agenda well thought and well prepared.
Yeah. And so this just to ask again, this cost control tower approach, is that now something, is it like a temporary intervention that you only do in crisis time? And when we're talking here about these declining markets, or is it just part of normal operations?
Well, again, another great question. Companies started up like an initiative because they were needing, let's say, cash, or they were needing just to reduce cost of goods sold, but then stayed. So you see, it's a I don't know how to say it, but it's a good housekeeping, process that is a virtuous process. I mean, I recall a bank in Spain, Bank Santander. They started very early, 2010, 2008. As a matter of fact, was right after credit crunch, to think about bottom-up kind of budget builds up. We call it after ZBBs. Well, you go to Santander today, it's part of life. So, control tower / demand management, it can be a state-of-the-art in certain companies because it's business as usual. I mean, I need to go to my boss and explain how the budget is built and how I'm going to be spending each of the lines and what would be even, in certain cases, the case of Santander, by the way, they even explain what would be the return of that investment. I mean, if I need to travel to visit a customer, what would be the return of that travel? It can be in new orders, it can be on a backlog, it can be just in new revenue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you see, yes, it can be just one time because probably companies are suffering from inertia, right? I mean, you want to do it, you get what you need, and then go back to comfort zone. I wouldn't recommend to do that. I think you need to take advantage. We need to take advantage as leaders of procurement and supply chain to institutionalize those practices that are virtuous and that are going to be essentially doing the good for the whole and not just the good for a specific period of time, which, by the way, and I will finish with this, it can be also perceived in the market if you could do it in a kind of sequential way, like every 6 months or every 12 months, market can get accustomed and say, okay, here we go again, Raffaele, with his control tower or an eco factory, and well, let's prepare for that next time. So anyway, no, it has to be institutionalized is my humble advice.
Yeah, wonderful. And maybe just a last question to Dennis. So if you look at your presentation, you started with, I think, six different options. I don't know if there's a difference between options for short-term impact, mid-term, or long-term. Mm-hmm. But how do you determine out of all these options, out of this whole palette, what to apply?
Well, it very much depends on the needs of a client or the situation that they're in. If you really talk about short-term spend reduction, so cost management, which is with an impact within a period of, let's say, 2-3 months, then you would move to a cost control tower. If you are in a situation where you want to have sustainable benefits over a longer period of time, you would typically look much more at category management. So it very much depends on the situation that a client is in. And therefore, we typically start with an assessment to understand where are they, what is the objectives, and what are the boundaries that we need to work in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Raffaele, for this wonderful presentation. And now we have concluded our speaker sessions, and we will move on to the last segment of the day, which is a short panel discussion on the topic of cost management in declining markets. So if there are still any questions from the audience, please type them in the chat. Now is the final moment. And we will take a minute to change. And then I would like to invite our panel for the panel discussion. I would like to invite Leon Berndsen. Raffaele, I hope you stay on and join this panel. And also Argon&Co's lead productivity specialist in the Netherlands, Frank Stieger. Please join this panel discussion. So, welcome again.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentations, interesting questions from the audience. So it's quite an event today. So Leon, just let me just crack at it directly. What's from a leadership perspective the real challenge to get the productivity and cost management?
Oh. There are many, but let me mention a few. Let me just mention 3. One element I think is speed. And I think one of the leadership aspects is how can we make a start quickly? If you talk about declining markets, well, declining can be permanent or can also be temporary, like we see in our cocoa chocolate business, because if prices of cocoa will drop again, we see the market, pick up again. So speed is important. And, there's a risk that, many people get involved and it becomes a large project and it becomes almost an institution without moving forward. And I think one of the leadership challenges is how can you start small, do a kind of a pilot, make sure you show successes and manage. The second one, I think, is the alignment of targets. We need to work together, with all the functions in the company, commercial, procurement, operations, supply chain, and setting common goals and common targets is absolutely key to get the common perspectives of things, whether it is gross margin, whether it is cash flow, whether it is productivity. As long as these targets are aligned, then you can really make a boost in order to improve profitability and productivity. The third one, and I'm working in a large, corporate environment, is indiscriminate cost-saving targets. What you often read in the papers, we are in heavy weather. We need to do a headcount cut. FTE reductions, travel ban. I mean, we all know these things.
Classic.
Well, exactly. Well, there's a leadership challenge to pick and to translate that into, those elements that are really contributing value. So to move from indiscriminate targets to see, well, what is actually driving your value? Well, if you talk about headcount reduction, well, is that the right thing to do? If any, where? But try to package it in a program that is really driving value, and it takes courage, because in some cases you may say, good plan, but not now. Yeah. And that's not easy in a large environment where you get indiscriminate savings targets produced.
Yeah, very interesting. So Frank, I mean, you are the lead productivity advisor at Argon&Co.
Yeah.
I mean, Leon just, gave a great answer.
Yeah.
What's your view on this?
Let me add two elements to these the earlier three mentioned. I would like to mention scalability. So to what extent, I think it's important for a leader to realize a scalable organization that enables you to, whenever the top line sales fluctuates, that you are able to align your cost structure to it. And so I think that's basically that's productivity, of course. So, and in order to do that, I think we have to invest in people. So, for instance, to make them multi-skilled, that includes training programs. That also needs investing in having solid processes, and really manage them cross-functionally, including proper handovers. That also will help you to become more flexible. Mm-hmm. So that's one. And the second one, you already mentioned in your earlier presentation, Leon, it is about focus on the right targets and the right metrics, I should say, and well-defined metrics. So instead of measure them at an aggregated level, really deep dive and start measuring your core processes in a granular manner. We call that outside-in measuring, and that basically move from monthly reporting to, okay, what is the output of your factory yesterday or today or even the last hour?
Yeah.
And if you start doing that, you're going to learn more and more. And you start learning where are your opportunity losses. And using those insights will enable you to make progress and to actually improve your productivity.
Yeah.
So having the right defined metrics will enormously help you to increase productivity.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And I think also, once you start measuring that by day, it might be a bit painful, right?
It is, of course, because you're going to see more and more variation. you're gonna raise more and more questions like, why did I had a poor day yesterday?
Yeah.
Whatever poor is, that's basically not meeting your standard.
Yeah.
But it raises questions, and that might be a little bit painful in the beginning.
Yeah.
But the real benefit, of course, is it enables you to learn.
Yeah.
Can I build on that? I mean, of course, you mentioned scalability.
Yeah.
I mentioned speed. What I see is that the market is ever changing faster, faster and faster. And I think, agility is one of the key elements here.
Yeah.
And in order to be agile, I believe you need to be super structured. Structured in your processes, super structured in your data.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like a paradox because many people say, well, agility is do what you like.
No.
In order to be agile, you need to be super structured.
Yeah. So maybe another question that we got to address to Raffaele. So, this whole webinar is titled Cost Management in Declining Markets. We'll be really talking about that. But how would you manage cost in growing markets?
That's a great question. I mean, as a matter of fact, I was just listening to my colleagues and they're bloody right. If you look at the supply chain pressure index, we are pretty much never seen before. The pressure index was established in 97, and then we were between 97 and 2008 credit crunch. We were pretty much in a cycle of 3 to 5 years. Credit crunch to COVID, it was kind of 6 to 12 months. Now it's just incredibly completely scattered. I mean, the curve just goes ups and down in a space of 6 months. So everything that we said, if you think about, the three levers, but we can, keep going. There are 60 plus. It can be applied in normal times, or kind of offensive, or I would call it, protecting margin. And then companies are well established. Everything is cool. Everything is fine. And then why applying all these levers today? Well, essentially to keep going and investing in innovation, and invest in new product launches, and so forth, so forth. So anyway, I think the same levers apply even in growing market. I would change the question in a suppliers or vendors market or a buyer's market. Today, we're in a buyer's market. You look at that pressure index, I mean, never seen before the supply over exceed demand, but in a exponential way. I mean, never seen, and in a matter of 10 months. In a matter of 10 months, we're just coming from short supply and microchips, shortages, to now it's all you can eat. So it's just crazy. So long story short is that if you keep your strategy steady and say, okay, category management is of the essence. Okay, then it's a building block. Second is essentially you're going to be using other techniques to incentivize your teams, to mobilize your team, energize your team, reactivate your teams, but also watch out, be tactical. I mean, I know this wave is going to go up again in the next 6 months. I mean, people are thinking in mid to 2024 to turn back again to a seller's market. You see, so we need to take advantage of that window. And then, yes, how can you mobilize the teams in that struggle? I mean, now it's about category management, and then you look at strategic sourcing, and now we need to run and then do these kind of things that we call demand management or price containment strategies. So anyway, long story short, you can apply for normal times, which is a defensive strategy for companies. You can apply, of course, in bad times, which is, of course, I mean, is the last resource, but it's essentially for restructuring. But then you can apply also for offensive strategy. I mean, the company wants to conquer certain markets. You need fuel for that. You need cash for that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, you can use the levers that we just explained independently of what the market is. So you see, it's about your company, your DNA, and of course, your vision and strategy, where the company wants to go and where the company is at a certain point of time. So anyway, I hope I covered your question, but yes. It's a complex one.
Yeah, it's a clear answer, and I take from it that you always have to be prepared in a strategic and tactical way for any type of market, whether it's declining or whether it's growing. So, with that said, I would like to thank all of our guests, Frank, Leon, Raffaele, Dennis, and Rolf, for this wonderful, wonderful session. And now I think the time has come to close the discussion and complete the webinar. So, thank you to all of our audience at home, watching or at the office, watching this webinar, our guest speakers, our colleagues at Argon&Co, for making this special event a real special one. But before we close this webinar, I would like to just share 3 major takeaways for our audience to contemplate. So, as we have seen, there are more than 60 options to improve productivity. Yeah. So use them from an outside-in perspective. Second takeaway is get a transparent view of your true cost in supply chain and operations, and also measure true productivity where you focus on value. Now, the third takeaway is when you manage spend, you really have to check the 3 options for the short term, for the medium term spend management, versus the options to improve managing spend and procurement for the longer term. And I think with those takeaways, we have completed this webinar. If you want to reach out to us, please do that. We can have a personal conversation. You can email us at frank.steve@argon&co.com. And again, having said that, I would like to once again thank our audience, our guest speakers, and our colleagues at Argon&Co who made this webinar possible. And for our audience, we hope to see you the next time at one of our events. And we will, of course, send you a replay of this recording to all participants. Thank you and have a great day.